The sun was a hammer, and the rock was its anvil. Elara lay pressed against the blistering stone, the rough hemp of the ropes biting into the raw skin of her wrists. Dust, fine as milled flour, caked her split lips and the corners of her eyes. Each breath was a draft of fire, searing her throat, stealing the last vestiges of moisture from her body. Consciousness was a tattered cloth, fraying at the edges, and she drifted between a searing present and the cool, dark memories of a life that now felt like a story told of someone else. The world had shrunk to this single, agonizing point of existence. The heat, the pain, the thirst, a desperate, primal thirst that overrode all other thought. She had sent her son, Leo, hours ago. Or was it only minutes? Time had become a thick, slow-moving river of torment. "Go to Mr. Silas," she had rasped, her voice a dry crackle. Tell him Mommy is playing a game and needs him to help her win." It was a foolish lie, a child's shield against a horror no 6-year-old should witness. But the truth, that his uncle had done this, that Jed's greed had curdled into a cruelty this profound, was a burden too heavy for his small shoulders. She had watched his small figure, a wavering speck of blue cotton, disappear over the shimmering rise, praying to a god she was no longer sure she believed in, praying he would find the neighboring ranch, praying the reclusive, hardened man who owned it would listen. Now only the drone of insects and the vast, indifferent blue of the sky remained. Despair was a physical weight pressing down on her chest. Jed had promised to be back by sundown. He had smiled when he said it, a thin, mean slash in his sun-browned face. By then, he'd sneered, his breath smelling of stale whiskey and self-satisfaction. "You'll be ready to sign that deed, or the buzzards will this land." Her husband's legacy was all she had left, all she and Leo had. The thought of her son, alone and terrified, was a separate torture, a blade twisting alongside the heat and the ropes. If Silas turned him away, if Leo got lost, a wave of nausea and terror washed through her, more debilitating than the sun. She closed her eyes, the fierce orange of the light burning through her lids, and saw only his small, trusting face. The silence of the plains was absolute, broken only by the frantic beat of her own heart. The heat baked the will from her bones, leaching the fight from her soul. This, she thought with a terrifying clarity, is how it ends. Not in a soft bed, surrounded by love, but cooked alive on a slab of granite. A warning to any woman who dared to think she could stand alone against a man's world. The horizon began to blur, the sharp edges of the scrub and yucca softening into a hazy watercolor. She was fading. A small, dark part of her welcomed it. The pain would cease. The fear would end. But then, an image of Leo's face, his eyes wide with a question she could not answer, swam up from the depths. No, not yet. She clung to that image as a drowning sailor clings to driftwood. For him, she had to endure. Silas drove the fence post into the hard-packed earth with a grunt, the rhythmic thud of the maul a lonely percussion in the immense quiet. His sweat-soaked shirt clung to the rigid muscles of his back. He worked with a grim economy of motion, his focus narrowed to the task, a deliberate method of holding the world and its ghosts at bay. It was in this state of willful solitude that the boy found him, a flicker of movement at the edge of his vision, too small to be a stray calf, too deliberate to be a coyote. He straightened slowly, resting the heavy maul on the ground. His eyes narrowed against the glare. The boy was small, his face smudged with dirt and tears, his chest heaving with the effort of his run. "Mister," the voice was a thin, reedy plea. "Are you Mr. Silas?" Silas gave a curt nod, his gaze taking in the child's distress. He recognized him now, the son of the widow from the adjacent plot, the one whose husband had been taken by fever last spring. He hadn't spoken more than a handful of words to the woman, just a nod of acknowledgement across a shared horizon. "My mommy," the boy gasped, struggling for breath. "Jed," he tied her up, to the big flat rock. His words tumbled out, a frantic, jumbled confession. He said she was bad. "She's in the sun, mister. She needs water," The child's lip trembled, his carefully constructed bravery crumbling. She said it was a game, but she was crying. A cold stillness settled over Silas. He had seen Jedediah's kind before. Men who mistook brutality for strength, who preyed on those they perceived as weak. He looked past the boy, toward the hazy expanse of the widow's land. He pictured the granite outcrop that sat exposed on her southern pasture, a place where not even the hardiest scrub could find shade. A muscle in his jaw clenched. Without a word, he strode to his horse, pulling a heavy canvas canteen from the saddle. He unstrapped the knife from his belt, its worn leather sheath a familiar weight in his hand. He looked down at the boy, his expression unreadable, carved from the same harsh landscape they inhabited. "Show me." As they walked, the boy, Leo, stumbled to keep pace with Silas's long, determined strides. He looked up at the man's grim face. "You're mad?" Leo stated, a note of fear in his voice. Silas's silence was vast and unnerving. "Jed gets mad like that," he didn't reply, his eyes fixed on the ridge ahead. To the boy, the man's focused fury felt no different from the uncle's cruel anger. They reached the crest, and Silas paused, his gaze sweeping the terrain below. He saw her then, a dark shape against the pale stone. He turned to Leo. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice low but absolute. He swung onto his horse, the leather creaking under his weight, and urged the animal into a steady canter. Leo watched him go, a powerful figure receding into the shimmering heat. He looked angry. He looked like he was leaving. The boy's heart sank. He had failed. The man was riding away in a rage, and his mother was still tied to the rock. Alara heard the hoofbeats first, a dull thudding that vibrated through the rock and into her bones. Her heart seized. Jed. He was back early. A dry sob caught in her throat. She wasn't ready. She hadn't found the strength, hadn't marshaled the will to face him again. She squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear escaping to trace a clean path through the grime on her cheek. But the sound was wrong. It was a single horse, its gait steady and urgent, not the shambling pace of Jed's tired nag. She forced her heavy eyelids open, blinking against the blinding light. A man on a dark horse was descending the ridge, a silhouette against the merciless sky. It was not Jed. It was Silas. Hope, fierce and painful, surged through her, so potent it almost choked her. He hadn't turned Leo away, but her relief was immediately shadowed by a fresh wave of despair. From the ridge, her son's small voice carried on the wind, thin and desolate. "Mama!" He was mad. He rode away. Alara's head fell back against the stone. Of course. Why would a stranger involve himself? A man like Silas, a man who kept to himself, would see only trouble. He had likely taken one look and decided it was not his fight. The horseman was simply passing by, a cruel mirage. The brief, sharp hope made the returning darkness even blacker. She had failed her son. She had failed herself. Then the shadow fell over her. She blinked, her vision swimming. The horse stood a few feet away, and the man, Silas, was kneeling beside her. He said nothing. His presence was overwhelming, solid, real, and silent. He smelled of dust, sweat, and leather, the scent of the very earth she lay upon. His large, calloused hands were surprisingly gentle as he lifted her head, pressing the mouth of the canteen to her cracked lips. The water was cool, a shock of life. She drank greedily, clumsily, water spilling down her chin and onto her chest, a baptism in the dust. He let her drink her fill before he pulled the canteen away. Then he drew his knife. For a terrifying second, her breath caught, but he simply turned his attention to the ropes. With two swift, efficient cuts, her wrists were free. The sudden release of pressure sent a wave of pins and needles through her numb arms. He worked with a quiet, focused intensity, his face a mask of concentration. He did not look at her, but she felt his gaze was on the injustice of the ropes, the heat, the indignity of it all. He was not looking at a woman. He was looking at a wrong that needed righting. When he was done, he helped her sit up slowly, his hand a firm, steadying presence on her back. The world tilted and spun as blood rushed back to Alara's limbs. She swayed, and Silas's arm was there, solid and unyielding, preventing her fall. He remained kneeling, giving her a moment to reclaim herself, his silence a strange form of respect. It allowed her a shred of dignity in her utter degradation. She finally managed to meet his eyes. They were the color of a stormy sky, deep and serious, and in them, she saw not pity, but a profound, shared understanding of hardship. It was the look of a man who knew the cruelty of the world and had chosen not to be broken by it. "Thank you," she whispered, the words scraping her raw throat. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, as if thanks were an unnecessary complication. He rose and walked to her son, who was now running toward them, his face a mess of relief and confusion. Silas placed a hand on Leo's shoulder, a gesture of quiet reassurance. Just as Silas was helping her to her feet, another horse appeared on the ridge. Jed. His smile faltered when he saw them, his eyes narrowing on Silas. "Well now," Jed drawled, swinging down from his saddle, his posture a study in false bravado. "Looks like the party started without me. This ain't your concern, Silas. This is family business." Silas moved, placing himself between Jed and Alara. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, his stillness more menacing than any threat. "Get off her land," Silas said. The words were flat, stripped of emotion, yet they carried the weight of an ultimatum. "Her land," Jed scoffed, taking a step forward. "She can't work it. A woman alone is a waste. It ought to belong to a man who can." "She's not alone," Silas stated. It was not a promise or a proposal. It was a simple fact. He was there. His presence had altered the equation. Jed looked from Silas's implacable face to Alara, who was now standing straighter, a flicker of defiance rekindling in her eyes. He saw Leo, standing half-hidden behind Silas's leg, glaring at him. The bully in Jed, accustomed to preying on fear, faltered when confronted by unwavering strength. He saw no fear in Silas. He saw only consequence. With a final, venomous glare, Jed spat on the ground, remounted his horse, and rode away, his retreat a cloud of bitter dust and impotent rage. Silas watched him go, ensuring he was truly gone, before turning back to Alara. He helped her onto his own horse, then lifted Leo up to sit in front of her. He led them home, walking beside the horse, his hand resting lightly on the bridle. When they reached her small, weathered cabin, he helped them down. He looked at the cracked porch step, the loose hinge on the door. He said nothing, but she saw him notice every detail, every sign of her struggle. That evening, as twilight bled purple and orange across the plains, he returned. He carried a small, covered pot that smelled of stew, and in his other hand, a hammer and a handful of nails. He didn't ask permission. He simply knelt and fixed the broken step with 3 swift, sure blows. He left the stew on the porch, met her gaze for a long moment, and then turned and walked back toward his own darkening ranch. Alara stood in the doorway, Leo's hand tucked safely in hers, and watched him go. The land was still vast and unforgiving. Her grief was still a raw, open wound, but the crushing weight of her loneliness had lifted. Strength, she was learning, wasn't about the absence of fear or pain. It was about enduring them. And sometimes, it was found not in a declaration, but in the quiet, steady sound of a hammer echoing in the dusk.